9.1 is, like it says on the screen, it's an overview, kind of like a preview of environmental health. So there are lots of important things here. The first thing that we need to look at is the different types of hazards. Remember, hazards are anything that can hurt you. We've got a couple of different kinds of hazards. If it's biological, remember that means it's alive. So viruses fall under that category, even though they aren't always considered alive. Social hazards are lifestyle choices that sometimes can overlap with chemical hazards. Something like smoking is a social hazard, and it's also kind of a chemical hazard. Having lots of unprotected sex is a social hazard, but it's also a biological hazard. And then physical hazards are things that can physically hurt you, like a tree branch falling on you or UV radiation causing cancer, those types of things. Epidemiology, that's one of your vocab words. That's how we study, that's the science of studying diseases in human population. You looked at the tracking an outbreak lab. That was an epidemiological activity. So you were trying to make connections between diagnoses and dates and how things were traveling around. Another important term here is toxicology, which is the study of how poisonous substances affect on an organism's health is. See, toxicity is defined there, how dangerous something is. Toxicologists are people that look at the toxicity by determining dose-response relationships. The way that most of us will encounter toxicology is through drug tests. If you go get a drug screen, you're looking for toxins in your system, so that's going to be done by a toxicologist. Individual responses to different toxins are very different. Right now, I saw a study recently that recommended lowering the blood alcohol content for impaired driving to 0.05 instead of 0.08. That article was all about how different levels alcohol affects different folks in different ways, based on your age and your gender and your weight and how healthy you are. Those things will affect you differently. Someday when you grow up, you'll see that alcohol affects you differently when you're healthy than it does when you're sick. Many diseases have genetic as well as environmental factors. Things like diabetes, you can inherit it genetically, or you can develop it by eating poorly. Hazards will affect you differently based upon your genetics. So one of the things that comes along in this unit is a risk assessment. Remember, risk is how dangerous something is, basically. So our risk assessment is trying to measure how dangerous an activity is. Insurance companies pay people to be risk assessors. How dangerous is this person? Is this person someone that we should insure? You see there the common hazards on the screen. That's talking about the risk of death per 100,000 people. So heart disease is pretty risky. Driving a car, getting in an accident is pretty risky. Falling, especially if you're elderly. And then you see some of the lower things. Illegal drugs are pretty risky. And then rail trespassing accidents. So that's like getting hit by a train when you're walking on the tracks, and lightning and things like that. As humans, we tend to be terrible at risk assessment. I'll smoke one cigarette. That's not going to affect me in the long run. I can speed on my way home because I know the roads and it's not that dangerous to speed. I can try this illicit drug one time because it probably won't affect me in a negative way. And on the other end, we tend, I personally freaked out about flying to Rome. I was very nervous about the plane crashing. Well, that's not a very high-risk activity. If the plane does crash, I'm in trouble, but it's pretty rare for a plane to crash. So just in general, as humans, we struggle to evaluate risk accurately. So think about the things that you do. Think about the long-term effects and how risky is your behavior. How risky is it to have unprotected sex? It's pretty risky. That's a pretty risky decision. And those are things that we need to take into account when we are making decisions on our actions. So that's section 9.1.